Do we need more carrot, or do we need to, coming back to the point Colin and Kate were making, do we need to actually make it clear that the greening that IT does for other industries is a lot larger than people actually think?
That's what I'd say, because I mean, on the data centre side, we are world leaders in terms of data centre energy efficiency. There are some, big behemoths out there that aren't very efficient, but one of the things of the sort of advent of cloud and the exposure of actually, if Amazon can do it for this price, why can't everyone else? Is that we've all had to become super efficient. And power, I run a hosting company, power's about a quarter of my cost of sale. So I have to be energy efficient. So actually that's happening already. And on the measurement side, I was in Brussels last week for a workshop with Digital Europe, so the European sort of Trade Association of IT. And there are a number of ICT carbon measurement methodologies that are at quite late stages of being developed. So there's 30 HPG one, there's ETSI, ITU, and another one. So we're actually getting really good at measuring this stuff as well. I think you're right there, that the challenge is saying, okay, we can state quite clearly how much power we're using, and even in terms of the use phase for consumer electronics, we're getting quite good at that. It's how do we then measure the mitigation of carbon elsewhere and prove that case. And because IT is quite a sort of horizontal penetration, that can be quite challenging. I mean, there are some obvious examples like teleconferencing, where you can sort of work out how much it costs to fly somebody around. But that's a hard thing. But at the same time, we are the IT industry. If anyone can do it, we should be able to. We're good at software.
Demonstrate ourselves.
Let's put some numbers on the data centre energy use in the UK. A recent study said that it was 6.2 gigawatts of power was being used every year by data centres. That is the equivalent of 3 Sizewell B power stations.
That sounds
It's a lot, and the entire across Europe as a whole, data centre energy use is the equivalent of the entire energy consumption of Portugal.
Right.
So it's a very big number.
It is. And so we need to show a lot of mitigation there, then, don't we?
Yeah. Well, we do, but
how can we do that?
Indeed.
If you mitigate it by chucking on taxation, regulation, these two elements, then we end up with a data centre market that dwindles in our countries and then decides to go somewhere where there aren't regulations and where electricity is cheap, coal-fired, CO2 emitting, dirty. Exactly, dirty data as the Greenpeace report, you're quoting there, Bob. So, there are 3 methods by which government can reduce CO2 emissions and work to reduce CO2 emissions in any particular industry: regulation, taxation and incentivisation. And the data centre industry at the moment is only facing regulation and taxation. And what I'm saying is other industries are facing incentives. Why aren't they? There should be an equal balance, and that way we can be globally competitive. But at the moment, if you just have regulation and taxation, we can't be globally competitive. And because it's a global cloud and a global market, our digital industry will just flutter off, and businesses will just dwindle.
I think the issue is that until when I was at a meeting with DEC a couple of years ago, and they didn't recognise the data centre industry as an energy-intensive industry. It's only really, it's taken us a long time, but we're now negotiating with them, my intellect hat on, to get a CCA, a climate change agreement for data centres. So that's for like aluminium smelters and that sort of things. And actually, when you look at the case, we've got a much better case than most of the industries that already have one. And that would mean that we'd come out of the CRC, which actually provides the sort of perverse incentive Pete's talking about, basically just stick it in Amsterdam where they don't have it. And actually overall would probably help us reduce carbon, but it's partly been that getting that mindset within DEC and DEFRA to say, actually, we are a key part of Britain's infrastructure and B, energy intensive, but also don't need beating around the head with a stick because we care about power because it costs us a lot of money already. Help us, work with us so we can improve it.
Colin, do you have a point
there? I agree with what's been said. I think the twin balance, if you like, of incentives versus penalties, for want of a better term, is out of kilter within the way that things are organised. And I think Kate makes an important point that it's only very recently that the data centre industry has been recognised as something that generates a lot of energy, that is energy intensive. And I think in a way that's part of the wider problem of IT, that we are a relatively new industry and relatively badly understood, I think, in government circles.
Throughout carbon reduction, energy saving, that movement within government, those trusts being formed and set up, IT's been last to the party. It's been ignored, and they've stuck their head in the sand for the rest of the time, despite case studies that say IT is actually massive or significant. They've just ignored it and chucked it to the bottom of the pile. And if you push Carbon Trust on this, they tell you it's because of a Jevons paradox, that if you go and put in new IT, then extra services get put on it. And what we actually need to realise is that extra services are actually extra productivity, extra revenue, and extra productivity for us as a country, rather than extra burden. And it's like saying, well, if we go and make your factory energy efficient, you're just going to build more factories. That's ridiculous, isn't it, to use that as an excuse not to incentivise a particular industry. So we need to face actually IT, what is IT productivity, and consider it in a more commercial and industrial fashion.
Do you think one of the problems is that government IT, we're not talking about government IT, but let's talk about it for this short period of time, because it's dominated by the big 6 companies, and it's very much a contractual based mechanism that they use. Because these contracts are quite long, Green IT is relatively short. It's not been around for very long. Is it because Green IT hasn't been embedded into the contracts that government have, and you get the point where if Bob asks for his support company to do some work, it's not in the contract, so you'll have to pay us more for it. And that's a sort of kind of perverse thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, government is working very hard to get its own IT arrangements into a better place as far as Green IT, and to try and demonstrate therefore what is possible with large companies and tackling the big issues that are there with its Green IT strategy, and also with the directions that have been taking in the whole government IT strategy, which is driving down data centres, looking at better utilisation, which was the thing you brought in earlier, that we maximise the use of everything we have in terms of IT terms, and also to then move towards cloud services, moving towards opening up, if you like, opportunities, not only for the existing service providers to build and bring in services and share, but also to SMEs and smaller companies to develop and see the government as a platform on which they can then demonstrate, implement, and then move wider into the private sector.
But that is a huge cultural shift.
It's a huge shift,
thought, isn't it?
And it's underway.
Which is happening with G-Cloud.
Yes.
Yeah, there's been a lot of change at the top in the Cabinet Office IT, and it really is. We're part of that program. It really is happening.
But I think what we have to do is to drive that back into the thinking in BIS and DEFRA, in terms of their normal business process planning strategy for UK PLC. And I think that's something we've got to do within that development and the Cabinet Office to bring it out back into the policy making more generally, such as CRC, such as how that fits with CCA.
Is there a problem with the financing of IT in general, where, for instance, there's a lot of focus on the capital expenditure of items, and if you get a tender, say for 1,000 desktops from Pete's company, for instance, they will be slightly more expensive than a conventional desktop from another company. And because the department's focused on capex rather than operational expenditure, the less efficient model that's cheaper will always get installed. But if you look at it over a 5-year lifetime, the products, the other piece, the energy efficiency products, are actually using less electricity over that period. But that doesn't get included in the actual decision-making process.
I think there's two things there. One is this move to the cloud service and this whole idea of dematerialising our IT asset base. So we don't own IT, we make use of services that are out there that are a hell of a lot more efficiently delivered because of the environments within which they have been developed, such as the internet, likes of Amazon, Google, etc. And the other direction is that in going towards the cloud and looking at cloud services, we still have, I wouldn't say an unanswered question, is the cloud green? Are we actually investing in something here that is a greener way of delivering IT services than buying it yourself?
Well, that's an interesting question, Bob. And
but that's probably going outside a bit of our remit.
That's actually I'm doing work on that with Surrey University at the moment, using my own company as a test case. And fundamentally, the answer is yes, because we're able to efficiently use servers. We fill the racks up. We utilise the space better. The machines aren't sitting around at sort of 3% utilisation all the time, whereas organisations doing it themselves invariably overspec, both in terms of data centre and in terms of the kit. And it's doing it on a massive sort of industrial scale is vastly more efficient. And government are trying to plug into that and view everything as an OPEX. And in that case, it becomes down to the service provider like me to say, okay, what's the cost-benefit ratio of a slightly more efficient machine versus the power usage over its lifetime, and we will make the investment in slightly greener technology where it fits.
Just to come back, if I may, is the hidden cost is the network. I think it depends how that is delivered, and as you say, it may not be. It depends the routes that you're taking, how efficient you are in terms of your network equipment, the gateways you're deploying, etc., and getting to the cloud service. And I think hopefully that is something that can be seen to be more efficient, but it's often been the case that we have switches, we have network equipment that carries a hell of a lot of power that is never actually being utilised. We usually bought network switches in terms of 24, 48 ports, etc. They're all activated, they're running. We need to get those down as well. That's the technology development we're looking for from the network suppliers.
Because of course you're kind of referring to that Australian Computer Society report there, which we studied as the Green IT SG, which showed that if you looked at the entire industry of servers, there was a slice of the CO2 emission, and that entire industry of servers and data centres was similar in size to the entire industry of...
That's right, there's a Japanese report.
Communications to get that equipment in terms of broadband provision, network provision, and effectively the backbone of the internet. And they were, those two pieces, network infrastructure and telecoms, were the same size as hosting and data centres in terms of CO2 emissions in that ACS report. Now, obviously, we can't comment on the validity of that report, but it is and could potentially be a significant piece. And I think one of the things we should be saying is, BT, what are you doing with ADSL? Where's that going, and what are your emissions, and having some transparency in that front, because there hasn't been that transparency in the UK to date to actually be able to say what is the backbone of our network costing us.
Well, it's interesting. If you actually take the CRC data that came out in October and look at it in terms of absolute carbon emissions rather than any of the early action metrics or anything like that, what you'll find is the top three are the Ministry of Defence, Tesco, and then BT. And BT emits something like 1.2 megatons of CO2 equivalent in a year, and that's before they've embarked on the Infinity upgrade. So and then 39th is Cable and Wireless, and 50th is Virgin Media. And out of the top 100, there are 10 networking, telecoms, or data centre companies. And that, I think, that is the hidden cost of the network.
And it's that bit in the middle which is the most difficult for individual users or individual organisations to have any impact and influence upon.
Because they don't get any information from BT. You don't get how much your cost of your providing that service was to you in CO2 terms. It's just you're just paying for your link into the internet.